Is it really a diplomatic offensive if there is no salacious leak that comes with it? Well, if so, then good news. We now have a salacious leak. Yes, Bloomberg has gotten a hold of an alleged phone call between a US envoy and a Russian advisor. And the information revealed in it shows just how broken the mindset inside of the White House is. So, on the agenda for today are 3 points. First, I want to go over just the facts of the Witkoff phone call. Then we will try to understand what Witkoff's mindset is here, which is perhaps more mundane than the current narrative suggests. Afterward, I will switch things up and point out that the leak itself is the bigger story. You see, someone else has interjected themselves into the situation, and we need to understand why. That is where the real intrigue is. But let's begin with the US-Russian phone call. On the US side, the main figure is Steve Witkoff. You will remember him as the special envoy who is currently negotiating a ceasefire between Ukraine and Russia. You may especially remember him from earlier this week as the main US entity behind that 28-point non-starter of a peace plan. On the Russian side, the main figure is Yuri Ushakov. Ushakov is the former Russian ambassador to the United States and is currently one of Putin's top foreign policy advisors. I might also describe him as the Russian Forrest Gump. He is in a ton of stock images that I have used over the years, even if he has avoided being a part of the story until now. Anyway, the date was October 14th. Witkoff was shifting away from Gaza war diplomacy to Russia-Ukraine. The two had a roughly 5-minute phone call where, unprompted, Witkoff offered Ushakov some advice on how Putin should approach the situation with Trump. Here is the key part of the transcript. I would have Putin make the call to Trump and just reiterate that you congratulate the president on this achievement, that you supported it, that you respect that he is a man of peace, and you're really glad to have seen it happen. So I would say that. I think from that, it's going to be a really good call. Because, let me tell you what I told the president. I told the president that you, the Russian Federation, has always wanted a peace deal. That's my belief. I told the president I believe that. And I believe the issue is that we have two nations that are having a hard time coming to a compromise. And when we do, we're going to have a peace deal. I'm even thinking that maybe we set out like a 20-point peace proposal, just like we did in Gaza. We put a 20-point Trump plan together that was 20 points for peace, and I'm thinking maybe we do the same thing with you. Maybe Putin says to President Trump, you know, Steve and Yuri discussed a very similar 20-point plan to peace, and that could be something that we think might move the needle a little bit. We're open to those sorts of things, to explore what it's going to take to get a peace deal done. Now, me to you. I know what it's going to take to get a peace deal done. Donetsk and maybe a land swap somewhere. But I'm saying instead of talking like that, let's talk more hopefully, because I think we're going to get a deal here. And I think, Yuri, the president will give me a lot of space and discretion to get to the deal. And with that, let's switch to understanding what Witkoff's mindset is here. We need to do this because, substantively speaking, it is hard to say whether his advice to Ushakov directly altered the fate of the world in a significant way. But it does speak to a certain naivete in these negotiations, which you can see directly in the discussion, and which certainly is playing a major role in shaping the substantive outcome of a potential deal. You will recall that Witkoff had a successful career in real estate before taking positions in Trump's administrations. Now, it is not uncommon for individuals like that to want to move to government positions, so they can leave a lasting and positive mark on the world. Spend enough time in Washington, and you will start to see them everywhere. The problem is that all of their experience is in business. They do not have experience on the government side of things, and those worlds operate in completely separate manners. For the current situation, I am sure that Witkoff has a basic understanding of what is happening. There is a war in Ukraine. War is bad. People die. Economies plunge into dark depths. The rest of the world suffers negative externalities. And thus, a noble goal is to end the war. Witkoff is happy to parachute in, because he thinks that he can contribute. He is an expert negotiator, after all. Why not just apply his expertise to this new domain? The problem is that he does not understand the substantive problems in the region. And I am not saying this like everyone working in diplomacy needs to have written a dissertation on the subject to be helpful. Someone like Marco Rubio, for example, has done nothing of the sort. But Rubio has someone at the State Department desk on Russia and Ukraine who can help him. Moreover, Rubio has been around long enough to understand that he needs that help, so he is not working on an island. The other half of the problem is that Witkoff has spent his entire life operating in a world where externally enforced contracts govern business behavior. And therein lies a problem. You see, the bulk of business contracts are about negotiating services for payments. In contrast, international relations is completely different. You rarely are exchanging money for goods or labor. Rather, both parties are competing for the same good. Failure to reach terms leads to bloody battles, and none of it is externally enforced. In other words, you want someone negotiating who understands less about business and more about the mafia. Don't give me Steve Witkoff. Give me Michael Corleone or Stringer Bell. And while I am sure that someone has sat down with Witkoff to explain the need to write self-enforcing contracts in international relations, that is an entirely separate skill set from what he has done his entire life. His apparent expertise does not apply, unlike, say, someone with Rubio's background. But now Witkoff has a high-ranking member of the Russian government saying nice things about how the war is bad, and that the killing needs to stop. He is even hearing about how Russia is willing to offer concessions and build guarantees into the deal. Maybe someone in the Kremlin even gave Witkoff their word, and Witkoff has seen movies where that sort of thing matters. What Witkoff does not understand is that those concessions are meaningless to someone with substantive knowledge of the situation, and those guarantees are easily broken in a world without external enforcement. But the point is that Witkoff genuinely thinks that he is on the verge of a breakthrough. He thinks that he is the good guy here, and the deal will be good for the United States, Ukraine, the suffering Russian people, the rest of the world, and, incidentally, Witkoff's historical legacy. But there is just one problem: Donald Trump. Witkoff knows how capricious the president can be, so he begins to offer advice to his Russian counterpart on how to personally handle the man. There is nothing wrong here from his perspective, because, remember, Witkoff thinks that this breakthrough is a good deal for everyone. The last thing that he wants to see is Russia fumble the ball right at the 1-yard line. My apologies to international viewers for that analogy. So Putin needs to know the best way of extending the offer to Trump so that Trump will accept this path forward. What Witkoff does not understand, of course, is that Russia is playing him. Ushakov and anyone else who meets him in Moscow is not his friend, and now he has divulged information that will allow Russia to continue playing the United States government at the highest level. Now, I said earlier that I am doubtful that this had a meaningful effect on what has happened over the last month. Witkoff's advice on how to deal with Trump is the same information that everyone has been saying about Trump for the last 9 years. But it is still not something that Witkoff should be doing, and he definitely should not be structuring the negotiations in the manner that he has, and that this alleged phone call confirms. Overall, the affair immediately demonstrates two things about the Trump administration. One, it is not a good look when the determinant of a foreign policy is how that policy is getting pitched to the president. What should matter is whether the policy itself is good or not. 2. Witkoff's coaching runs contrary to the conspiracy theory that Trump actively wants Russia to win the war, due to compromise or otherwise. At least from Witkoff's perspective, Trump needs some massaging to follow the Kremlin's recommendation. I guess for some, this will be a perverse silver lining. In any case, as I said at the top, the bigger story is the leak itself. The media and online commentators are spending too much time analyzing the words in the transcript, and not enough time analyzing the fact that there is a transcript for them to analyze in the first place. For such a transcript to reach the public, someone had to have leaked it. And trying to work out the motivation of the leaker is far more interesting than the transcript's direct content. After having spent yesterday discussing the White House's internal power struggle between Rubio and Vance, it is tempting to look at this as an internal hit job. Witkoff is closer to the Vance perspective of just get a deal done. Imagine that someone in Rubio's camp had the audio recording of the phone call for one reason or another. They also recognize that Russia's 28-point plan is terrible, but it is also associated with Witkoff, so they can release the call and undermine his position. It is a reasonable enough theory. However, Bloomberg released the transcript of a second phone call, which has not received nearly as much attention as the first. And this one is different. It is between Ushakov and Kirill Dmitriev, the central figure behind the aforementioned 28-point plan. And, side note, I actually think that this is the more interesting of the two transcripts. It is just that everyone is focused on Witkoff and the domestic politics in the United States at the moment. So, fair enough, I am focusing on just that part for today. But bet on us returning to the contents of the Ushakov and Dmitriev phone call in the future. Anyway, the key here is that these two are exclusively Russian figures. So unless you think that it is an incredible coincidence that both transcripts came out at the same time, the only conclusion to draw is that the recordings came from tapped Russian lines. Consequently, the recordings are part of an intelligence operation, not a political operation. To be clear, this does not rule out the possibility that the leak came from the White House. The recordings of some of the phone calls may have been available to a bunch of officials there, but the origin would still be from an intelligence organization. The next question is, which intelligence organization? If it is a foreign intelligence organization, then we can end the speculation that the source of the leak came from the White House. Rather, this is someone, somewhere, also frustrated by the contents of the 28-point plan, and wanting to do everything they can to sink it. Discrediting Witkoff is a great way to do that, and the contents of the phone call are a great way to discredit him. And if that was the intention, then mission accomplished. It is hard to get the general public to still care about what is happening in the war. But this story became headline news in the United States. Those of us paying attention to the situation may have already understood that Witkoff was not doing well with the negotiations. Now you can just show the phone transcripts to someone outside of the bubble, and they will immediately get the problem. Now, it is not certain whether the effects will happen overnight. At least initially, Trump was dismissive of Witkoff having done anything wrong. But there is bipartisan anger about the situation, and so that might force some changes. The optics of Witkoff having negotiated a final resolution to the Russia-Ukraine war, while offering friendly advice to a Russian official, are not good. Back to the origin of the leak. Ushakov told Russian media that the phone calls took place on WhatsApp, which once again raises questions why these types of conversations are not conducted on traditional secured lines. It is noteworthy that WhatsApp is supposed to run end-to-end encrypted, which either suggests that there is a much bigger security problem with the app, Ushakov's phone has been breached, or he was bugged and likes to have his phone on speaker. However the conversations were recorded, though, Ushakov's acknowledgement of the situation threw Dmitriev under the bus, as the latter had claimed earlier in the day that the transcripts were fake. Oops. But the unsecured line means that it may have been fairly easy for anyone from any corner of Europe to leak it. Ukraine, Estonia, the United Kingdom, inside or beyond. Nonetheless, we must also consider the possibility that it came from US intelligence. It is worth remembering that, as of a few years ago, it seemed that US signals intelligence had completely broken Russia. On the eve of the invasion, the United States was sounding alarm bells that it was going to happen, and was under the impression that Russia was going to make short work of Ukraine. One way the United States would have such confidence about the first point, and also believe the second point, is if someone was listening to all of Russia's internal communications. Such a person would then know that Russia indeed planned to invade. They would also be hearing the optimistic expectations that Russian officials had for the war, which would have contributed to the US intelligence assessment that Russia would win quickly. Regardless, a leak directly from US intelligence would serve the same purpose as a leak from abroad. There are plenty of people inside of the United States frustrated with Trump's handling of Russia, and this is a good way to force a change. And they mean business too. The leak reveals that someone had the ability to gather that information. You can bet that Russia is taking steps today to seal the leak. Whoever leaked the call would know that doing so would likely burn the source, and so they would not be willing to release it unless they thought it would bring change indeed. Meanwhile, nothing from today is changing the end of this video. There are still 2 excellent books on the war. Check the video description for more information about them. And if you enjoyed today's video, then please like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Take care.